Hey everybody, this is a video that goes through the notes that were posted on January 13th about the differences between asexual and sexual reproduction. Um, there's also the notes without the video attached as well, so if you're tired of listening to me talk, you can just check them out on your own. But I think there's a lot of extra things that we can discuss, and I know in class a lot of people asked a lot of good questions, so I'll try to highlight some of those things for you. We're going to start with asexual reproduction. Asexual reproduction is when one parent divides and makes two identical offspring. They are genetically the same. And we looked at this a little bit in trimester 1 when we looked at the 6 different kingdoms. We said that some protists do this. We said bacteria and archaea will always reproduce this way, where they simply just divide in half. The big thing is that that makes them genetically identical. Both of the offspring are going to be exactly the same as the parent. The most common way this happens, and it happens with unicellular organisms, is binary fission. And so first, a cell is going to copy its DNA. So you'd have one set of DNA, and before it can divide, it needs to make a complete copy of that DNA. And then it just simply splits in half. The cell membranes pinch and close up, and we end up with two exact copies of the original cell, both with 100% of the DNA, both totally identical to the original cell. Again, this happens in unicellular organisms. They're only made of one cell, so when they divide, one organism becomes two organisms. Another form of asexual reproduction where one parent becomes two offspring is budding. Budding is when a multicellular organism, here we've got a picture of a hydra, when a multicellular organism continues to grow, and when it goes through cell division and does mitosis, maybe it makes some specialized cells, it's making tentacles, it's making a mouth part, it's making a tail, but at some point it stops growing, and any new cells, it starts forming a new organism, and it grows right out the side of the organism that originally was there. It would be like if I just had a head grow right out the side of my body, identical. It looked exactly like me, and it just started growing off the side of me. Some plants do this. Typically, this is found in very simple, basic organisms. It doesn't happen in humans. Otherwise, we'd have clones of ourselves walking around, and that would be really weird. But that's called budding. Eventually, that little connection will break off, and we'll get one whole new organism swimming around in the water, and they're going to be absolutely identical to each other. This can also happen through a process called regeneration, where an organism can regrow missing body parts. So if something happens to be cut in half, both halves can grow back. Now, you and I, as humans, we can, maybe our skin gets damaged and we can regrow some skin cells, but the skin that falls off doesn't regrow a whole new person. Here, like with the starfish in the upper right-hand corner, if the starfish is cut in half and both halves are allowed to, get food and get water and nutrients that it needs, and it starts growing new cells, it can grow back and become two identical starfish, which is truly amazing. Regeneration only happens in really simple organisms. If my arm gets cut off, I'm not going to regrow a new arm. It's just not going to happen because I've got skin cells, bone cells, blood cells, muscle cells, nerve cells. Arms in a human are crazy complex. And while we have DNA to, maybe regrow hair, regrow skin, we're not going to regrow whole arms. So regeneration happens in simpler organisms, but they are multicellular. Next, we have another example of regeneration, just for fun. What would happen if we cut this planaria worm right down the middle, just this far though? You might think about that and go, well, Is it going to grow back together? Is it going to continue splitting in half? Or is it going to grow two heads? Yeah. And now it may die because this head and this head are genetically identical. But in the end, they're still attached to the same body. That doesn't really happen too much in nature. I just had to show you that picture because it's kind of fun. So, to review, asexual reproduction is when one parent divides, and it can divide by fission, budding, or regeneration. And in the end, you get that one parent turning into two identical offspring. Now, let's look at sexual reproduction. What? Mr. Berg, please don't tell me. Yes, we're going to talk about the birds and the bees. I hope someone sat you down and talked about the birds and the bees. But today we're going to look at the science, the cellular, what's happening with sexual reproduction. We've got a couple of birds here. It's easier to talk about birds than people having sex. So we got the male bird and the female bird, and the male is going to donate a sperm. The female is going to donate an egg, and they both have half the genetic information. And together they make a whole new organism, and you get a baby bird. Yay, baby bird. But have you ever wondered how the bee came into that conversation? You're like, well, birds and bees, okay, I get how the two birds and they make baby birds, and that's great. But, well, the bees come in when we talk about plant reproduction, because here's a flower, and the flower is the reproductive organs of a plant. If we were in class, we'd be doing flower dissection about right now, and they're really cool to do. I hope we get a chance later. But in the flower dissection, we would learn that this part here, called the anther, is the male reproductive part of the plant. And this part here, the one that's a little bit gray on the top and goes a little bit taller, that is the female part. That's the pistil. So way in the stamen. So that goes way down here. So on here, these little orange grainy things, those are the pollen, and pollen is the male sex cell. It's kind of like looking at the sperm, but the plant also has the female parts, and that's down at the bottom of this what's called the style, which is the bottom of this female reproductive organ. And down there, you've got where the egg would be. So the pollen grain needs to get up here and go down there. Of course, that can happen. A plant can pollinate itself, but that's not genetically what it wants. It's a genetic advantage to have more genetic diversity. So if you pollinate yourself, well, okay, great. You get copies of yourself. But if this pollen grain can catch a ride with a bee, here's where the bee comes in, catch a ride with a bee, and it flies over far away and lands on a different flower and pollinates that flower, then we get a unique offspring that's different than both of the flowers. And that is, we'll learn in February why that's a big deal. So, quickly, we covered mitosis when we covered cells, but 99% of cell division happens, and it is mitosis, where one cell copies all of its genetic information, and that genetic information gets copied and then split in half, and we get two exact copies. This would happen for like a bone cell, a muscle cell, a skin cell, any body cell. However, meiosis is the creation of sex cells. This is when one cell copies all its information, but then divides twice. So one cell becomes 4 sex cells. And because it divides twice, it means that each sex cell has half of the genetic information. They have half of the chromosomes of a normal cell. So what happens is a normal cell in your body has 46 chromosomes. they come in pairs. So you get one from mom, one from dad, and you get 23 pairs or 46 chromosomes. When your sex cells form, you only get one part of the information in each, so you get 23 chromosomes. But when a female egg and a male sperm combine, the fertilized egg is called a zygote, and now we're back to a normal body cell count of 46 chromosomes, which again come in 23 pairs. And as those go through mitosis and the stem cells form and multiply and eventually turn into specialized cells, then we end up with a bunch of normal body cells with all of the genetic information. However, because only half the information came from mom and half the information came from dad, the offspring, where it's two parents combining their offspring to make one organism, the offspring is unique. It's not just like dad and it's not just like mom, which is kind of awesome because I love my dad and I love my mom, but I'm happy that I'm not exactly either of them. I'm unique from them. And while I hope the good parts of my parents and are part of who I am, at the same time, I don't want to be exactly like my dad. We look around our class, we're all different. Every single human is different, and that is so great. We celebrate diversity. And so we have different hair color and eye color and skin color and nose shape, and we've got millions of things that are different about us, and all of that information is in our DNA. And next week, we're going to be looking at how does that DNA get passed from parent to child? Well, here's a big part of it. It's really important we understand that each of the sex cells only has half of the information. That's why you're not exactly like your dad or exactly like your mom. And while you might look more like one parent than the other parent, like my oldest son Eli, people tell him all the time, he looks just like your dad. You must have got a lot of your dad's DNA. Well, no, he got exactly half. Half of his DNA is from me, half of his DNA is from his mom. It has to be exactly half. So, again, your body cells have 46 chromosomes. They come in pairs. Our sex cell only has 23, and they are not in pairs. They're separate. So, to review, asexual reproduction is when one parent splits and divides into two identical offspring. Sexual reproduction is the opposite. Now we're starting with two. They're going to combine, and we end up with one unique, different than either parent offspring. So, and again, body cells, you have 46 chromosomes, and sex cells, you have 23 chromosomes. And that's found in every single one of your cells. Every body cell has 46 chromosomes, every sex cell has 23. All right? Let me know if you have questions. I hope this helped, and good luck learning about reproduction.